On October 30th, 1961, at 11:32 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, seismology labs from Washington to Tokyo recorded a massive anomaly. Needles hovered steady on paper drums, then suddenly, violently jerked to the right. A dense atmospheric pressure wave formed, pushing against barometers thousands of miles from the source. The displacement was so intense the shockwave traveled entirely around the Earth. It circled the globe 3 times before the energy finally dissipated. The source of the tremor was tracked to the Mitushika Bay Test Range, a desolate, frozen archipelago in the Russian Arctic, known as Novaya Zemlya. Soviet archives would keep the files hidden for decades, records of an event that forced a total reassessment of what human weapons could achieve. Delivering that force required a heavily modified Tu-95 bomber. The weapon weighed 27 metric tons and was so massive that engineers had to completely remove the aircraft's bomb bay doors just to fit it under the fuselage. The weight was only the first problem. To protect the crew from the thermal pulse, technicians stripped the plane of its defensive armor and coated the entire exterior in a highly reflective, specialized anti-flash white paint. They also developed a 1-ton nylon parachute, covering 1,600 square meters, to drag the payload and slow its descent toward the ice. These measures were desperate. Even with the parachute and the reflective coating, Major Andrei Sakharov and his crew were given a 50% chance of surviving the mission. At 34,000 feet, Sakharov flipped the release switch. As the bomb fell, the plane lurches upward, freed from the weight. The crew had exactly 188 seconds to reach a safe distance before the timers hit 0. The scale of the device was so great that its deployment was treated as a coin-flip suicide mission for the men inside the cockpit. 13,000 feet above the ground, the barometric sensors triggered the firing sequence. In a fraction of a millisecond, 50 million tons of TNT energy was released. The sky was instantly replaced by a sphere of plasma 5 miles wide, burning with a heat that exceeded the core of our own sun. The fireball was detonated high enough that it never physically touched the Earth, yet the radiant heat was so intense that the island's snow vaporized before the shockwave arrived. Directly beneath the detonation point, the thermal radiation was powerful enough to melt the Arctic bedrock, pooling the stone into smooth, dark obsidian glass. The explosion stripped the island of its snow, ice, and geological texture, leaving only cooling obsidian. The project was driven by Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, who demanded a 100-megaton weapon as a tool of political intimidation against the West. The task fell to physicist Andrei Sakharov. But as his team calculated the 100-megaton yield, they realized the weapon would produce suicidal levels of radioactive fallout over the Soviet Union itself. To reach 100 megatons, the bomb required a uranium tamper, which would produce an apocalyptic cloud of radiation. Sakharov replaced the uranium with lead. Lead absorbs neutrons, slashing the yield to 50 megatons and keeping the weapon relatively clean. The weapon was so large that the scientists had to deliberately diminish its power just to make the test survivable. 24 miles away, the crew of the Tu-95 felt the 18-second head start disappear. Traveling faster than sound, an acoustic wall of compressed air caught the bomber from behind. The impact was violent. The thermal flash scorched the anti-flash paint as the blast wave threw the aircraft into an uncontrolled freefall. Sakharov plummeted a full 1,000 meters before he regained control and stabilized the aircraft. The kinetic force of the weapon easily overpowered a 180-ton plane from dozens of miles away. When the crew leveled out and looked back at the blast site, they saw a structure that defied earthly perspective. The resulting mushroom cloud had punched through the troposphere and the stratosphere, peaking in the mesosphere at an altitude of 40 miles. It stood 7 times taller than Mount Everest, its cap spreading out against the dark edge of space. At ground level, Severny Island had been swept clean. The pressure wave had polished the Earth flat, leaving no vertical structures behind. The test proved that a single weapon could now erase the entire footprint of a major metropolitan city and its surrounding suburbs. In Moscow, the government celebrated. Major Dernovtsev was named a hero of the Soviet Union and awarded the nation's highest military honor. But Andrei Sakharov reached a different conclusion. He saw the physics he had mastered as an instrument for global extinction. Sakharov spent the rest of his life as a dissident, using his influence to fight for nuclear disarmament and human rights against the very system he had armed. A 100-megaton bomb was never built, but the blueprints and the physics remain in the archives. The Tsar Bomba remains a record of human capability. It shows that while the math of destruction is solved, our survival depends on the restraint required to leave it in the dark.